thank you so much to everyone has joined today, and welcome to any of you that are new to the Scale Up Stateside podcast. We were actually just catching up before, and I can't believe this is almost our 20th episode. If anyone has missed any of our Scale Up Stateside episodes, they're actually live to stream on Spotify and Apple as a podcast. So if you're a dog walker, commuter, anything, and you've got some time, you want to listen to some of the leaders and founders that PGC have supported enter and scale in the US, I would highly recommend having a listen to them. We're actually doing our final one of the year. I can't believe how close Christmas is coming. So what we thought would be quite apt for the last one of the year is to just look back on 2023, see how the US market has done from a performance perspective, see what sectors, locations are growing, and then also just have a look into 2024. So what we can expect from the staffing and recruitment market in the US for 2024, and then do a little bit of a similar kind of breakdown of sectors and locations. We do have a very special guest with us today, Ellie Taylor. I'm sure lots of you who follow us on LinkedIn have seen that Ellie joined PGC from a US recruitment background. So Ellie has been an absolute force of nature and support to our clients with questions around BD, entering the market, upskilling clients on contracts, selling contracts. So if we've got time at the end, we're also going to do just a little Q&A with Ellie to hear some of her insights of the market. But I think we'll dive straight in and just kind of look at what the market has performed like for 2023. So Will, if you're happy to kind of jump in and just share a little bit of an updated valuation, because I know SIA did actually update the predictions the last quarter of this year. So it would just be interesting to see kind of where we're looking and tracking to finish this year, the staffing market.
Absolutely, yeah. So half the press with the new figures that we've kind of got thanks to SIA. So I suppose in context to last year, I think everybody's found this year has been a little bit harder across the whole, the global recruitment industry, really, compared to obviously, the best year in recruitment history ever that there was last year. So if you look at the revenues that the US recruitment market generated last year, it was about $225 billion. So obviously incredible numbers. And this year, although it's still been a down year, it's still generated or projected to generate just shy of $202 billion. So obviously there's a slight decline there, a decline of about 10%. Just to preface that, obviously, because that does seem like a big reduction there for you, but that is a 10% reduction on the best year of all time that's ever happened in recruitment before in the US. So obviously the record-breaking growth that was happening during the pandemic. So 2021, the US market increased by 34%, and there was another 20% on top of that last year again. So it was just unsustainable. It couldn't keep increasing that way. And to give it a context, that $202 billion that we just mentioned there, if you look at really the last comparable year that you can make to that, which is probably pre-pandemic, you're probably looking around 188 billion or so. So actually, you've got a growth of a good 20 or 30 odd billion that the market was pre-pandemic. And if you look before 2020, so 2019, it's $50 billion higher than it was. So obviously, just to give a bit of context to that, like we said, it might seem a bit doom and gloom, but actually it's still an incredibly huge market and the opportunity is massive. Some of the other things that we kind of found this year, again, everyone was kind of worried about recessions happening at the start of the year, and that kind of put a bit of a hiring freeze on a lot of people as well. And so that kind of, had a bit of an impact on the ability of people to hire. Plus also what you've got to know about that 10% reduction as well is a massive driver of that is there was a 30% reduction in the medical industry from the staffing side. And that was because traveling nurses, which you can imagine during COVID, was the biggest industry in the US. It was enormous. And obviously, since the pandemic, people have returned back to hospitals, but not as big. So there's been a dramatic reduction in that. And that has pulled down the overall valuation of the market a little bit as well. So although, like we said, it kind of might seem it is, not as it was in 2022, I don't think we'd be fooling anyone if we said it was a better market than it was last year, because that would be impossible. But it's still an amazing market to be operating in. And, even despite all those pressures, it still performs, an incredible level compared to what it was prior to the pandemic, which, like we said before, is probably, if we're being fair, most comparable years to kind of make to this current year as well.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at the global staffing market, the US is still in first place by quite a significant amount. And to have 2 years of double-digit growth is huge. 50 billion larger than the pandemic, as you said, like $50 billion is pretty much the whole size of the UK market, or just the tech market in the US. So they're still absolutely phenomenal numbers. And if we were to just look kind of sector, kind of break down of a sector, see what kind of the top sectors that are taking that market share, what are you seeing as kind of the top sectors, but also which ones are growing the most kind of year on year?
Yeah, definitely. So just to kind of look at 2023, and I know Ellie's going to look at the 2024 data in a minute. Well, if we look at the top sectors, the biggest one, as everybody can imagine, is IT and tech. You're looking at about $40 billion there in terms of that kind of recruitment industry alone in the US. So to give some context, like Maria said, the UK recruitment industry in general, so everything is about $50 odd billion. So you've got 80% of that made up in one sector in the States. And then after that, the biggest industries are engineering, which you can imagine, again, in the States being huge. Finance, life sciences is coming in about $3.5 billion as well. Finance and engineering probably closer to $10 billion. And then one of the markets that we saw massive growth in this year, actually, which is really interesting, is the education market, which is really one that not a lot of our clients that we speak to tend to focus on. That's had a 20% growth this year. So despite all of the, like we said, the market pressures elsewhere, that's been really, really great, and has grown to over $2 billion now in revenue from that market. So, you're looking at some real kind of positives there. And although there's, like we said, there has been slight reduction, a lot in growth. Some of those key markets have really kind of not had that massive reduction. So again, if you look at IT, which a lot of people have kind of thought was going to have the worst year ever, can't have possibly got any worse than it was at the start of the year, you've actually got a reduction of 3% when you look at it across the whole year. So it's actually not been too bad considering what people, I suppose, probably thought it was going to end up being like.
Yeah, and I think to your point, again, if you take out those traveling nurses, you take out the healthcare sector, there's actually not really been a decline across many sectors at all. So 2023, we're looking to finish up at just under $202 billion worth of revenue being generated. And if we were to look forward to next year, what are the predictions currently as they stand for revenue to be generated?
Absolutely. I think the great news about next year is growth is predicted. So the value of the market next year is expected to grow and to be around 207 billion, which is a growth of around 3%, which is obviously fantastic. I think within that growth, we're seeing about 7% growth or increase in perm placements and perm revenue, which is fantastic, and around 5% on the temporary staffing side. So growth, which is fantastic to hear.
Yeah, love that. And I think one of the things that most of our clients are surprised about when looking at the US market is actually how that revenue is split up between perm and kind of contract, contingent, freelance workers. So actually of that predicted 207 billion that's going to be predicted to grow next year in the US staffing market, 88% of that revenue is being driven by your contract, temporary, freelance placements. So it's an absolutely huge market. I think currently you've got about 1 in 5 workers in the US that are contract or temporary. In the next 3 years, that's looking to be pretty much kind of 2 out of 5 that are going to be contracts. So to see that contract and temporary is going to be growing by 5% when it's already such a huge market share is amazing.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think when kind of looking at industries, it's quite interesting to see which industries are kind of bouncing back after last year. Engineering is one that is expected to see 8% growth next year, which is, a really substantial number when talking in the 10 billions. Education is meant to rise again by 7%. So as Will said, not a lot of our clients look at the education sector, but it is one that is growing and looks to be continuing to grow into 2024. The IT and tech staffing market, again, more growth, 5% growth, which is huge because they are kind of predicting 43 billion in revenue in the tech market. So there's some really positive growth coming out next year, and kind of a nice way to start 2024, thinking of these numbers. And yeah, hopefully the growth happens.
Yeah. And I think what we've definitely seen as well with our clients is where maybe the UK market or the US market has slowed down slightly for them this year, it's allowed them to really put in the building blocks and the scaffolding and kind of the foundations to make sure they're going to be entering 2024 kind of robust with strategies and processes in place to make the most of that growth. One thing that I am really excited to talk about, and it'll be a slight pivot in conversation for us, but it's just locations. I know we focus a lot on guiding our clients where to maybe open second offices, first offices, scaling. And given the sheer size of the US, it's really important that you are laser focused when you're targeting the market, when you're winning clients, building relationships. So, Will, do you want to just, before we jump into what we've seen, just refresh kind of the audience's memory of where we saw the 2022 kind of data finish in terms of states for generating the highest number of revenue in staffing and recruitment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I know you guys would agree as well. Like you said, Maria, already, this is like the number one question that everybody asks. It's like, where should we focus on?
Yeah.
And annoyingly, the answer we give is it depends. It depends on so many things, but hopefully some of these kind of figures give you at least some ideas of actually the different markets that you could potentially look at as well. So if we look at 2022 first, like you mentioned, the top 5 states are kind of traditionally always been the top 5 states. So California is traditionally always number one because it's the biggest state. It's got the biggest economy. It's got a similar GDP to Germany. So it's like it will be like the 3rd or 4th biggest economy in the world if it was a country. So as you can imagine on its own, it's absolutely massive. So looking at the revenue from just California on its own, it's 41 billion on its own. So like we said, that's the entire tech industry revenues that we were talking about earlier. So it's enormous. So we kind of always imagined California to always be number one. It'd be quite a performance to knock it off the top spot. And then last year, one of the interesting things that we saw was that Texas had overtaken New York as the number 2 revenue generating state, which had never been the case before. It had always been New York number 2. So that was a really interesting trend that we saw. New York number 3, Florida number 4, and Illinois number 5 as well. So that was the top 5: California, Texas, New York, Florida, and Illinois. If you look ahead to this year, no surprises. California still projected to be number 1, but New York has come back in at number 2, guys, which has been a very exciting development for those that are sad enough to be tracking those type of things like me. Texas has been taken back down to number 3. But some of the more interesting things that we've noticed is that actually North Carolina has jumped up out of nowhere and come up from lower down the rankings to the 4th most popular state and this is clients that we work with every day that are onboarding, staffing, placements in the US. So these are real live, kind of data from clients like yourself who are in the market and making placements. North Carolina this year is the 4th most popular state so far out of all that, over Florida, which I think was something that really surprised us all when we saw that data as well. Some of the other things that kind of were interesting to look at as well was that, kind of the likes of like Pennsylvania and Illinois, again, are kind of higher ranking, especially Pennsylvania. That's now in the top 10 as well. So rounding out the rest of that as well, you've got New Jersey, Massachusetts, all the states people can mostly imagine, and then Georgia was number 10 as well. So like we said, that was some of the more interesting kind of things from that. One of the fastest growing ones, which is after someone says, where should we focus? Everyone says, where's the fastest growing markets to have a look at? So again, looking at 2023 data compared to last year, so looking at the performance of those states, number 1 for us was Maryland, which was really, really interesting. We've had a 23% growth in onboards in Maryland this year. So, there's loads of different factors that might be, but that was a really interesting one. And I've definitely seen that from my clients, actually. More and more of the contractors that they've been onboarding based in there. So that's interesting. And then some of the others of note as well, like Illinois, North Carolina, and South Carolina as well. So the Carolinas are going to come up again, in the future, and you'll see why we've seen so much growth there from clients that we're working with. But Illinois, 17%. And I think a lot of people fall into, not a trap, but people like to get drawn to your New Yorks, your Austins, your Miamis when they're looking at setting down an office at Boston even. Not that many people think of Chicago. But you see there, it's always in the top 5, if not, some of the more, fourth place in some of the highest revenue generating states for recruitment. And so, that could be a really interesting market that certainly not that many folks think of as the first place that they're going to go and set up a firm or target as their market.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because you're so right. Like, so many people say, where should we go? And it's not a black or white, answer. It's so dependent on what industry you're in, where your end clients are, where your talent is. And especially kind of post-COVID, where a lot of clients have embraced remote work. A lot of different states now are putting in different incentives to attract businesses to relocate there, or attract talent to move there with lower income tax or 0% income tax. So it's really key that you are really thoughtful of what location you're looking at. What I love seeing more and more is clients talk about Florida, like Austin and Texas has been such a point of conversation for the past 2 or 3 years. There's more Fortune 500 companies in Austin than there are now in New York, where we've had clients look at states like Florida now. They'll go and they'll say, this does remind me of what Austin was like 3 years ago. You can see that infrastructure is getting built. You can see kind of, the more mature market developing. So I think it's really key that you obviously map out where clients and candidates are, but also look at the data and look at the trends. We thought it was huge last year that Texas had jumped to number 2. It's interesting to see that our year-to-date data has shown that New York's now jumped back to 2. So you can see just how close the kind of data is between those.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I kind of think possibly one of the reasons for that too is we have seen a bit more of a kind of return of people to the office. And obviously New York is a fantastic location because there's loads of states around New York that you can commute into. You don't actually necessarily have to live in New York to work in New York. And obviously there, technically, if you were then hybrid or remote, you're no longer actually working in New York. You're working in New Jersey or Connecticut or even Pennsylvania and traveling in rather than New York proper. And so actually a lot of that is probably, firms now thinking actually we want some kind of hybrid or, person in the office role, which has then kind of led New York to kind of have that bounce back as well as people return back to the city, where during COVID, we did see a lot of people kind of flee and kind of go to different areas as well.
Flee, run. No, definitely. And I think it's really interesting to see how talent is still migrating. I think Bloomberg kind of coined it the Great Southern Migration in the US, and you've seen a lot of talent moving to these warmer states for better lifestyles, cost of living, etc. Ellie, do you want to just kind of touch on what we've seen as the biggest kind of growth states in terms of the migration in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of candidate migration, the kind of big winners in terms of population growth were Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina again, and Tennessee and Georgia. And what's really interesting when you kind of look at these states, they will have very, very many things in common. So they have zero or very low state income taxes, which is obviously very attractive for personal income and also businesses as well. They are warmer states, so the weather is better, which seems like a small thing with migrating talent, but everyone loves the sunshine, don't they? I think the other thing is it's just more affordable. The cost of living is definitely going up across the US and the UK. And if they can move to a state where they can save significantly and get cheaper rent, for example, then they're going to move and retain more of their salary.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, low to 0% income tax. Obviously, in the US, you're still paying your federal level, which is kind of marginal, like it is in the UK. Like, depending on how much you're earning, you'll pay a percentage. But for some states to have 0% income tax, what that means to a top biller director living or operating in the state of New York versus what it might look like in Florida or Texas. If you're earning in the hundreds of thousands, that's a significant difference. So I think that's also really interesting for business leaders to think about that when they're looking at what their hiring strategies might be for next year. Where might you want to get talent on the ground? Where do you want them operating, and what that would look like even from like a package point of view, because the taxes can affect that highly.
Yeah, exactly. I think New York, it's around 10.9% local on top of the federal level. So yeah, quite a large percentage you'd be retaining just from living in Florida, for example. And what was also interesting is looking where that talent was migrating from. So looking at the states where talent are leaving, and those are California, New York, which both are notoriously high tax states. You've got Illinois, New Jersey, and Massachusetts on there too. So yeah, interesting to see where they're coming from and where they're moving to for looking at talent next year.
Yeah.
So almost like everybody's gone, I'm fed up with paying big taxes in the big city. I'm going to go to the beach and pay no tax and have a nice little almost semi-retirement in the middle of my career.
I mean, I would do it.
Yeah, I got bored of that. Maria, are you in?
Now stick in New York. No, but it is interesting where we've spoken with leaders that have had 5 years of their recruitment career operating in New York, and then they'll move to, you know, a southern state, an Austin, Miami, a Tampa, Orlando. And they're just like, my life is so much different now. Like you could imagine, like the grind of working in central London recruitment, you know, is a real hustle. Not saying you don't need to hustle in the US, you absolutely do, but it's going to be a very different lifestyle. I think we also see quite a difference in kind of the labour workforce and how that is traditionally made up. I think one of the most surprising things to our clients is actually contractually how similar kind of perm and contract workers are in terms of their entitlements, in terms of, you know, paid time off, healthcare, 401k, their pension. So the US, unsurprisingly to us, but the US actually does have the largest global contingent workforce in the world. So it's estimated that last year there were 33 million contingent workers in the US, and we'll speak with US counterparts or, you know, US contacts and friends, and they'll see that to be in a perm role, to be working kind of a year plus in a role is seen as longevity. And again, because of the likes of at-will notice or at-will employment in the US, where it means legally there's no requirement for either party, whether you're an employer or an employee, to give any notice to terminate a contract. That's where we're seeing kind of the contingent and contract market grow year on year. So there's been reports, I think Robert Half did a report that last year over 70% of end clients use contract as kind of a strategy to hire in talent. And Ellie, I know we've had conversations about this when you were selling in contract to your end clients. Off the back of last year, where you've seen the big kind of Twitters, the Teslas, everyone gets splashed around in the paper for these mass layoffs. I think next year you're seeing a lot of clients really embrace contract because of how agile they can be with hiring talent and bringing in kind of specialist talent to work on projects. So although we see a lot of our clients definitely enter the US market perm first to build revenues and high fees, the way that the contract market is growing and how we'll see by 2027, nearly half of the US labor workforce will be contract. You know, if you've not got a solution or you're not selling in contract to your end clients, yeah, you'll definitely want to make sure like entering 2024 is something you're looking at, given that nearly 90% of the revenue is being generated in the contract kind of market.
Yeah.
Ellie, from your experience, what have you kind of seen the biggest shift in the contract market specifically kind of last year and this year?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Will touched on one of them earlier, which is remote workforce going back on site or as a hybrid position. A lot of job postings and managers wanted their workforce back on site, even if it's just kind of 2 days a week or even a day a week. So that we saw a big shift in, and maybe why we see more talent being recruited in the likes of New York, because a lot of businesses are based in New York. So that was one of the big shifts last year. I think another one was due to the mass layoffs, like you've mentioned. People were more open to doing contract if they were perm. There are so many similarities between a perm position and a contract role in the US. They're still eligible for employee-sponsored healthcare. They have essentially they have time off between contracts, where notoriously the US don't get a lot of paid time off. So they really have a better work-life balance. So yeah, seeing a lot of talent open to contract, which has also been great. I think also companies covering themselves using contractors to fill in gaps, like you mentioned, we definitely saw a lot more contract roles come on the market. So yeah, they're probably the main differences.
And I think what's slightly different in the US as well with contract is you really need to educate your clients that you
100%.
have the ability and capabilities to compliantly place contractors for you. Like, just because you're helping them on the perm side, it doesn't always automatically, translate that you can also fill contract. Do you feel like that kind of resonates when you work in the contract market?
Absolutely. I think in the UK, if you're a recruiter and you're approaching a manager, they'll assume that you do both perm and contract placements. In the US, it's not like that. A recruiter will tend to be specialized in perm or specialized in contract. And they may not even realize that you have contractors on your book, or you have colleagues that place contractors. So it's always worth opening up that conversation, asking if there's any requirements, because it can be really, really quick wins for BD and placements. So yeah, always mention contract on calls that you're getting any kind of attention with a hiring manager.
Yeah, love it. Fab, I've just spotted the time. So in the last kind of 5 minutes, I think it would be useful if we just kind of touch on hiring trends to watch for 2024. So what we're seeing, I guess, from a legislation point of view, what we're seeing with trends. So I think one more and more, and definitely something that we touch on when we do some training with consultants that are entering the US market, is pay transparency. So pay transparency in the US is essentially a law where you're advertising a role, you legally are required to advertise kind of the lowest salary that it will pay, as well as the highest salary. And we have definitely seen this as a growing trend across the US. And Robert Half again did a survey that, over 40% of workers will now expect to see a salary range in any job postings that they're seeing. And 57% of them would actually consider taking themselves out of the recruitment process if the salaries haven't been put at kind of a minimum and maximum threshold. So I think more and more that's something to be aware of, and also be really kind of clued up on what states it is mandatory to have a salary transparency kind of on your job postings, because being seen as an expert in the US, you'll definitely want to know that you've got to legally kind of advertise minimum and maximum. So we're definitely seeing that as a trend. Sorry, Will, do you want to...
No, I was going to say, it's just as a little kind of tip for people who are going to be doing that. That is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in more and more states. So currently there's a couple of states that have that in place. I know that even British Columbia in Canada, they're now bringing that in as of January, and that's going to be mirroring California's version of that, which is pretty much the strictest one that they have. And so this is something that really is only going to become more and more prevalent with more states. So a good little hack, and Amazon do this, for example, is they just do it on every job ad, no matter where the person is based, because it's just a nice, easy hiring practice you can get into the habit of, and you're not going to fall foul of that legislation everywhere. So if you just put a minimum and a maximum on every job ad, then you've kind of got yourself covered there.
I think also with the amount of talent applying to job adverts at the moment, it will also help sort ones that would actually take the salary for your job. So all in all, definitely get the kind of pay on those job adverts, because it's just kind of safer and helps you sort those candidates out from the get-go.
Yeah, definitely. And I think next year as well, like to both your points, the candidate pool is much larger in 2024. So you're seeing end clients be slightly more strategic with who they're bringing in. So really hiring for growth. They're taking advantage of gig workers. So any contract to hire, so temp to perm equivalents, they can be slightly more kind of not longer, because you've still got at-will employment, but strategic with who they're hiring, their hiring plans. So I think that's an amazing opportunity for recruitment and staffing firms to embed themselves even further into long-term strategies. What are your end clients wanting for growth? Because actually, your end clients are at the advantage going into 2024 with the bigger candidate pools. I actually cannot believe how quickly 30 minutes has just gone. If anyone watching does want some more kind of in-depth detail of any of the sectors that you are going to be focusing on or recruiting into 24, please drop Eddie, Will, or I a message. We'd happily jump on a phone call with you, make sure you're kind of, set up for success to enter and smash the US market next year. But Guys, thank you so much for your insights, for the data. Love looking at it, and it's amazing to see kind of year-on-year changes. But yeah, I think we will wrap up here. Any questions, as I say, please reach out. And if you've missed any of our Scale Up Stateside episodes, feel free to reach out to us or check us out on Spotify. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas. Have an amazing festive period.
See you next year.
Want help mapping out your US expansion? Visit us at www.pgcgroup.com to learn more or schedule a free US expansion opportunity session with one of our consultants.